I would like to apologize in advance, because my microphone did like to snap, crackle, and pop at some points during this video. I currently have a more proper video in the making, but figured I'd give you a little something else in the meantime. But first, allow me to introduce you to my fluffy poultry. How's it going, ladies? No, ladies, wait, come back. Hello. Well, the camera's focusing too much on the fence, but you get the idea. And I've been reading a lot lately, particularly the Firemane Saga by Raymond E. Feist. Now, the Firemane Saga consists of 3 books: King of Ashes, Queen of Storms, and Master of Furies. Now, you may notice that I don't have the first book on me. That's because I lent it to a friend. I don't know if I would have done that if I had finished this book, because I was halfway through Master of Furies when I lent it to him. This is going to be a spoiler-free review. Now, right off the bat, I'll say the prose is really solid, very detailed, characters are fantastic, vivid descriptions, especially when it comes to the sea, and these books have a lot of boats in them. And for the most part, the pacing is quite solid. I would say the first 2 books are the strongest, the second book being the stronger out of the 2. To me, Queen of Storms has the strongest writing overall, just the best scenes in general. The books kick off with this really brutal sequence where an entire kingdom is erased, the royal family is executed, but there's one surviving member who is taken to a kingdom of spies and assassins, like the whole culture is that way, and he is entrusted to their care to be raised up. And slowly over the course of the books, he comes into his own and realizes his untapped potential. And how the story escalates is very well done. There are a few gripes that I have. With the first book, I feel like it goes a little bit too hot and heavy in the prologue, which the books are quite brutal. But how it kicks off, it's like not only is there brutality, but it feels like it's trying to appeal too much to Game of Thrones fans with its finality, and there's this character who's absolutely obsessed with sex right off the bat, and so it's just grisliness and venality. And then it goes off into more of a somewhat standard young adult novel. I wouldn't consider these to be young adult novels, that's how they're marketed, but content-wise, it's not meant for teenagers. It's very much for adults. Maybe late teenagers, 16 through 17, depending on who you are. But there's a bit of a tone shift very quickly in the first book, and that does come back into play, but with all of it combined, especially with that character who's very focused on sex, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense because he barely comes up again. But then this book right here is just absolutely flawless. Like, I really enjoyed reading it. Now, Master of Furies objectively has the best book cover out of all 3. However, it also has the most deficiencies, I would say. And we'll start off with the minor gripes, which is there are certain names of places and maybe even people, but I think it's just a few location names where they're spelled out consistently throughout the first 2 novels, and then for some reason the spelling was switched around in the 3rd book. So I don't know what that's about, but it's there and it was a little annoying and immersion breaking, I would say. The thing that probably annoyed me most about Master of Furies is how there's this one plot line from the first book that, it's brought up again and again and has an impact across all of the books, and you're kind of waiting for it to see where it goes and how it ends up. And it does finally get resolved right in the last 2 chapters, but it's kind of like it just resolves itself. There isn't really a whole lot of explanation as to how it's resolved. And so that was pretty underwhelming. Now, this is mild spoiler territory, but this is the thing that would have held me back from lending the first book to my friend, or at least I would have had a bit more of an in-depth discussion with him before lending it to him. So with King of Ashes, the first book, when it was released, it was marketed as its own standalone universe outside of the Rift War Saga, which is Raymond E. Feist's other fantasy series, which there are like 15 books or something in. So what drew me to this particular series is how it was its own standalone thing. And that's the case for the first 2 books. The 3rd one takes a turn for some unknown reason, which to his credit, he actually does tie it in really well. and it still feels like its own standalone thing. But by the end, the universes overlap so much that I know there's a fourth book. Technically, it's the first book in the Dragon War saga just released this year. And it's a continuation. I am tempted to pick it up, but maybe not anytime soon, because now that I know that there is this whole other host of characters from his other series, now I feel obligated to read all of those books, or at least the Rift War saga, just so I know what it's about and who these characters are, because there's no doubt going to be tons of references in that book to that series. And that's a massive time investment that I just can't afford right now. Especially since I have so many other books on my reading list that I'm far more interested in. My reading list is full of things like Blood Meridian. I started reading this about a week ago. I'm already halfway through. And man, that is some beautiful prose. Absolutely brutal storytelling, but his descriptions of nature are just phenomenal. The philosophical concepts woven into it, I'm really enjoying. And these books didn't really tickle that so much. Its strength really lied in the characters. There's some philosophy, but it's pretty minimal, and a lot of it comes in with this book. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed this book overall. It's just the last few chapters left me kind of wanting, like, really, that's it? And like the loose ends got tied up one way or another, so I suppose that counts for something, so there was some level of satisfaction. It just wasn't what I was hoping for, especially since his writing is so strong in the rest of it. The first book I would give an 8 out of 10. Queen of Storms I would rate, I was going to say 9 out of 10, but honestly I don't see a reason to take a point off, so 10 out of 10 for Queen of Storms. Master of Furies I would rate a 6.5 or 7 out of 10. Again, great writing throughout, it's just that the end was it felt a bit rushed, kind of like the author was on a deadline or something. So would I recommend the Firemane saga? Overall, yes. Like, his writing is very good, very detailed, especially the ship sequences. He just goes into so much detail that you feel like you're actually on the ships with these characters. The pacing is pretty good overall, at least up until the end. One thing that I do really appreciate about Raymond E. Feist's writing is how, specifically in the first book, there's quite a few complex narratives, quite a few politics, and it can feel a little bit overwhelming at first, but the author really holds your hand throughout the writing, reiterates some things, and so the books are very easy to follow. And I really appreciate that because the plots themselves are anything other than simple. Some interesting ideas thrown in, and it gets into religion a little bit, but it's not really anything too profound. It's stuff you see in just about any other modern media. There was a priest character at one point who I thought was going to be a bit more nuanced, but it turns out to be something completely different. So now my recommendation does come with a caveat, because the universe does eventually meld into the author's other books. So if you don't mind being oblivious when you read certain parts in the last book, or if you don't mind reading a completely different fantasy series, then go all for it. Like, I've heard a lot of great things about the Rift War saga. Apparently one of those books left a bit to be desired, but overall people just rant and rave about how great they are, so I'm sure it's not a bad series, and it'd probably be well worth one's time to read them. Just for me personally, fantasy isn't something that I read a whole lot of, but as a casual fantasy enjoyer, this was, well, enjoyable. And for those of you who are wondering, I'm smoking a Kentucky Fire-Cured Fat Molly. This thing smells like beef jerky. It's fantastic. You may be surprised to know it tastes very smoky. And it's a little bit peaty, maybe some cedar notes in there, but it really does taste very campfire-like. Some smoked meat flavors. Got a little bit of coffee in there as well. And what I'm pairing it with is some lemon ginger tea with added honey, of course, and whiskey. And that's all I got for today, so be sure to smash that dislike button and leave your cruelest comment down below. Farewell.